Stockton Mayor Michael Tubbs was the youngest mayor in the nation's history, elected at the age of 26. He took over a city in distress and has innovated some new programs, including a guaranteed income for some of his residents, a pilot program that's seen so much success, other cities are now talking about emulating it. I'm going to discuss all that with the mayor, but first, I just want to give you a little bit of a window into his personal story. Mayor Tubbs was raised by a single mom in poverty while his father was in prison. He went on to graduate from Stanford University and ran for city council in his city, I think I'm going to ask him exactly his age, at a very young age. And all this is now the topic of an HBO documentary, Stockton On My Mind, which you can watch. But the point of all this is he has seen the inequities in society up close and personal and can speak to these issues both as a leader and as a human being who's witnessed how society works these days. Mayor Tubbs, thank you for your time and for being here.
Oh, thank you for that too kind introduction.
So, I want to just start with the news right now because we're speaking as the Democratic convention begins. Kamala Harris is now on the ticket as the first Black woman on a major national party ticket. What does this signify to you that she's part of the new leadership of the Democratic Party?
I think it signifies that we're realizing that talent and intellect are universal, that leadership in this country has to look like this country. Senator Harris, as a vice president, really speaks to the dreams and aspirations, not just of little girls, which I can imagine how huge this is, but for everyone, that no matter your race, no matter what your parents come from, no matter kind of who you are, your gender, that there's room for you to lead. And I think particularly in this moment, when we're dealing with crises that are affecting women and people of color more significantly in this country than other groups, when we think of COVID-19, but when we also think of essential workers, when we think of the economy, when we think of the civil unrest around Black Lives Matter. So to have someone who embodies the intersections of all those issues, but also the promise and how we could get better as a country makes me really emotional and incredibly excited.
I should mention that your name has been floated as a possible Senate replacement should she go into the White House. Has anybody talked to you about this?
Just people on Twitter.
It's not the world.
I think it's just an honor to be 30 years old and be even considered.
I want to talk about some of your innovation. First, because I have a national audience, Stockton is a town in Northern California. You at one point had the most foreclosures in the nation, filed for bankruptcy. I understand 20% of residents live below the poverty line. You decided to do an experiment with guaranteed income. Would you first explain why?
Absolutely. And I will also offer that Stockton's a city of 315,000 people. So people think we're a small city and we're kind of small for California standards, but we're the 60th largest city in this country. And part of it was understanding that so many of the issues we're faced with educational attainment, with poverty, with violent crime, with crime in general, with homelessness, a lot of it at its root was issues with poverty and economic insecurity. And coming in as mayor and realizing that I don't have a lot of time. I have 8 years max. And that we had to do something to at least advance a conversation about what's actually necessary to create the community that we want to deserve. And I learned about guaranteed income through studying Dr. King, and we decided that we would pilot in Stockton the idea that providing an economic floor for everyone is a good one.
Would you explain how the project works? How much money folks get, how many people are getting it, and how you chose those people?
So for the past 18 months, and we've extended it because of COVID to next January, thanks to a gift from Carol Tolan, 125 families from throughout the city are given $500 a month on debit cards. And what we tried to do is make it as universal as possible, meaning we made the selection criterion one that was as inclusive as it could be. So basically to qualify, you just had to live in a census tract that the average median income was at or below the city's average median. And that's important because it means there's people in the program who make less than $46,000, the average household income, but there's also people in the program who make more. It's been very encouraging to see, no matter where people are on the income ladder, that something as small as $500 a month has been helpful, has allowed people to pay for off credit card debt, to invest in their children, to apply for other jobs, to get dentures and cook Thanksgiving dinners. And I say this because I came in as a skeptic. I came in saying, I hate the poverty and the impacts it causes in the community. So I'm all on board for any solution that's better. But I didn't come in thinking that this was the solution. I came in very curious, wanting to find answers, but now I'm a full-fledged evangelist for the concept. Particularly during this time when we have people who are out of work, small businesses who are closing, people who can't access unemployment insurance, and they still have to pay all the bills during this global health crisis.
So this is not a topic without some controversy. So I really want to dig into sort of what you've seen. Because it's on debit cards, you guys are able to see how the money's actually being spent. So can you give us a window into how much goes to things that are, frivolous versus basic life's basic needs?
Yeah. And for all my nerds out there like me, if you go to stocktondemonstration.org, you can read the discussion paper, look at the data dashboard that's updated every month. But essentially what we found is that people spend money how you and I spend money. So the majority of money is spent on food, then on appliances, maintenance, cars, then on children, and a small percentage is spent on miscellaneous items. There's one story I love to tell about this guy, Tomas, who when I interviewed him, I said, well, how did you spend the money? It's like 4 months within the program. And he said, well, I was able to get an interview. And I was like, oh my gosh, you paid $500 for an interview? This is what people are talking about. Oh, you got scammed. And then he looked at me, he said, no, Mayor Tubbs, I work hourly jobs. And because I work hourly jobs, I don't have paid time off, meaning I couldn't interview for jobs I may be qualified for without risking losing money. And I have $2 on their paycheck to paycheck. I couldn't afford to do that. But the $500 allowed me to take a day off so I can interview. And now I have a better job with benefits and a stable schedule.
I posted about this interview, and one of the questions I kept getting asked is who's paying for it? And I think it's important for people to know this is private financing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I tell people all the time that charity isn't justice. So this pilot is philanthropically funded. I'm thankful to all the philanthropists that funded. And for me, that was important because I think we should test ideas. We should see what happens. We should see what works before using taxpayer dollars. I wish we applied that same vigor and rigor to every decision we make with taxpayer dollars, which we know just isn't true. But in this case, I was very adamant, like, let's start with private dollars, let's learn, and then we can make a case with evidence and data about the need for public investment so it scales.
Do you think you can really extrapolate from some 100 odd people to a nation? How do you see this evolving in other cities?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great start, and that there's other pilots, other studies going on in this country right now, and also throughout the world that literally say the same thing. During COVID-19, we had 200 economists, folks who are smarter than me, who read the graphs and all the data and all that stuff, who came to the conclusion that at least during COVID-19, we have to give regular cash payments to people to stimulate the economy, to grow the economy, and to keep people healthy and alive. So I think part of the next iteration is that we launched this group called Mayors for Guaranteed Income. And the idea is to allow other mayors to test and try the ideas in their city to create a groundswell of support and stories and anecdotes that will compel our federal leaders to act. And I think one of the biggest learnings for me, Jessica, has been this idea that if data actually moved policy, our world will look radically different. Data is important, but it's really the stories and the anecdotes that move policies. And that's why I think even pilots of 100 people are important. Those are 100 families, voices, and experiences that allow everyone to see themselves reflected and say like, oh, wow, this can work. We don't turn to a different country. We don't lose American values. We don't become some place that's slothful and no one wants to work. But in fact, we become better for it.
So, how do you push back against that trope that by giving people money, they'll stop working, which we're seeing in Washington right now?
Yeah, well, I think there's three concrete examples that disprove it. The first one being that we give people money all the time. It's just who do we give money to? We just gave in 2017 $2 trillion to the top 1% of this country and to CEOs and companies. And not hating them. They're smart people. They work hard. I'm proud of them. And I just don't think they're the only people that can be afforded the dignity and the opportunity to spend money. So number one. Number two, the vast majority of people in this country work. That the largest group of people who aren't working are children because we have child labor laws. But the vast majority of people are working themselves literally to death and still can't pay for necessities. So the issue isn't work, it's wages. We have all these people working and people still can't pay rent. We have all these people working and people still can afford healthcare. We have all these people working, and then after they work, they have to stand in line at food banks, which is completely ridiculous. So this is actually a compliment to this ethos of work, and also rewards people whose work isn't paid with a paycheck, but it's the work that keeps society going, like caregiving.
To your point about who gets government support, since COVID has hit, the Federal Reserve, which is our money source basically, has been plowing trillions into our economy, buying securities, helping lenders. I'm going to read something from a Brookings article, which is a think tank to my audience who doesn't know that. They say the Fed has expanded the scope of its, quote, repurchase agreement operations to funnel cash to money markets, and is now offering an unlimited amount of money to financial firms so they can borrow and lend cash and securities short term, usually overnight. That is not called a handout. That is not called a taxpayer giveaway. Nobody thinks that'll keep people from doing their job. What is it in our society that has convinced so much of our culture that this isn't charity, but $500 to a family that's working is?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's rooted in things that are great in our country, but also things that are insidious. I think part of what makes America such a land of opportunity is this ethos of working hard, of this constant work ethic, which is a good thing. But I think part of what's so insidious is that over time that's become racialized. So when people think of people struggling, when people think of people who are on government assistance, they don't think of financial market people who are usually white men, and they'll think of poor white folks in Appalachia who also need help and support. They think of Black folks in cities like Stockton and Chicago. They think of Latino folks in cities like Los Angeles. And it becomes racialized. So a lot of these tropes aren't just about kind of people not working, but particular types of people in this country. So I think part of this guaranteed income discussion is also a discussion around how we all do better as a country when we all do better. When we give opportunities to the majority, like we give to those who make a lot of money, that our country as a whole grows, that our economy is actually stimulated when we give money to people who are going to spend it and not saved into offshore accounts.
In light of COVID, do you think that the country, as you believe in universal basic income now, so is it your belief that the country should sort of speed into that now? This should be a catalyst to jumpstart. Congress should pass something ASAP?
We absolutely have to. And I think we saw with the one-time $1,200 checks that were sent out. Nobody was upset when that check hit their mailbox. Nobody was. And in fact, the data says the majority of that money was spent within 30 days and spent on necessities like food, like rent. And I love the fact that we're having a discussion about unemployment insurance. But unemployment insurance was a bold idea in 1935 when it was part of the New Deal. It is now 2020. I don't use anything just from 1935. I use things with 1935 as a foundation, but we build upon it with new knowledge. I think in the same way, we have to build upon the New Deal with our own 21st century, 100 years later, understanding of how the economy works, what's needed for people. And I mean, if you look, the GDP shrunk by 33%. There's millions of people being laid off. They can't access unemployment insurance. People are hungry. Folks are at home. Eviction moratoriums are expiring. We are really in a very serious moment, and I'm frustrated because I think so many of our leaders are so insulated.
Can I ask you some basic questions? These are from the audience about how you think UBI should work. Can it be done without raising taxes?
I think at some point taxes well, you could reverse the $2 trillion in tax cuts we gave in 2017. And in doing so, Vice President nominee Harris has a bill right now in Congress called the LIFT Act that shows by doing that, you could give families making $125,000 and less $500 a month to the tax code. And that's not raising taxes on anyone, it's just reversing a tax cut, and that would get us a huge step forward. So you could do that. There's ideas about data dividends, around this idea that so much wealth is created based off our data and what we put on the internet. That should be a national resource in a sense, and everyone should be able to extract some value for that, particularly if Mark Zuckerberg could become a centibillionaire because of said data. There's discussions about kind of if marijuana was legalized at the federal level like it should be, using some of that revenue as a source. So there's ways to get to it, but will have to raise taxes, particularly amongst those who are doing incredibly well during the pandemic, so that everyone else can do well as well. And I don't think that's a scary concept or a crazy notion, because in doing so, we'll create a community that's safer, that's healthier, and there's less of a tax burden for all of us.
Do you envision UBI replacing federal assistance, food stamps, other kinds of support?
Yeah, so I'm 100% against the idea that universal basic income or a guaranteed income should replace the existing social safety net. I think it should add to it. And that's why, as a first step, I'm saying we should do a guaranteed income. That maybe getting to everyone is too much to start with, but let's start with people who we know who need it. Let's start with families making 125K or below, or families making 50K or below as a start, because in American politics, change is incremental. We're not going to get all the way there immediately, but today, tomorrow, yesterday, we should at least have an income floor in place for those who absolutely need it.
People call you a socialist or a communist or a Marxist because you want to give money to people. They attack you, they criticize you. What's your response? How do you handle it?
I think if it's about guaranteed income, it's like, well, Sarah Palin, when she was governor of Alaska, she was popular because she increased the Alaskan Permanent Fund, which was money given to people in Alaska just for living in Alaska, based off and she was giving people money. And that's literally how she became the vice president nominee, as a very conservative Republican who gave money to people. So I'm just as socialist as her.
Mayor, thank you for your time.
No, thank you for having me.